Solana is inherently very, very fast, but why does it need an L2 on top of it? Or what is kind of your thesis behind that?
Yeah, great question. This has been asked a lot at
I'm sure it has.
that I've been on. I feel like it's a controversial thing because everyone loves to come in thinking Solana is this like monolithic chain. It's all about performance. Why do we need these new things? And I would say there's room for both. I would go out there and say not every application has to be on an app chain or an L2. There are plenty that need very high levels of composability and want to lower the friction.
Today's guest is Tristan Frizza, the founder of Zeta Markets. Zeta Markets is a DeFi perps trading platform that is also building an L2 solution for Solana to bring high-speed trading to the network. I'm excited to have Tristan on and talk more about Zeta, what they're developing, and everything else in between. Tristan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Really excited to be here.
Excited to have you. To start off, can you kind of tell us about how you got into the industry and what made you want to launch Zeta?
Yeah, sounds good. So I got into crypto around 2017. I was mostly just playing around with the exchanges and what was on offer there. That was when I was learning to program, so building scripts and trading a bit. And that got me interested in crypto, which kind of informed a lot of the kind of courses and things that I did in university around distributed systems. I built my own proof of work blockchain and got really interested in what's actually happening outside of the hype and token prices and altcoins. The technology is actually pretty interesting. So I read into a lot of the early Ethereum research and then went off, got a real job for a couple of years, ended up coming back to crypto because I really wanted to do a startup and I missed kind of the DeFi wave and what was happening with smart contracts and came back to Solana, which I was like kicking off, I guess, just in like early 2021. There were almost no projects. It was a really like interesting new chain with high performance and all these kind of guarantees. So that really appealed to the technologist and nerd in me. And I was fortunate enough to meet Anatoly, the founder, who's an incredibly talented engineer. And that's basically how we got started on Zeta. We wanted to build better financial infrastructure and build it on smart contracts where things are transparent and you can audit everything and it's kind of fair in what it can do. And that's what we've been building for the last couple of years.
You kind of joked that you got a real job between crypto to Solana. What was the real job?
I worked in AI research for a couple of years. So I worked in Silicon Valley. I was doing a lot of data science modeling. Actually, my thesis was on generative AI, which is now the hot thing, but I was doing it before it was cool.
You were cool before it was cool. Exactly. Yeah. So 2021 to now, how has Zeta Markets kind of evolved from maybe the initial vision into where you are today and what you're working on?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot, honestly. Crypto moves at breakneck speed. So a couple of years in crypto honestly feels like probably 10 years in a traditional industry.
Very true.
So when we got started, essentially, we started in a Solana hackathon. We just enrolled. I was still honestly working at my old job. We just took a couple of weeks of break. We built out this very rudimentary options exchange. That was our first product. So options trading, it's on the very right curve, I would say, of financial products. And that was like a fun challenge to build. It was a very technical thing and required a lot of modeling and knowledge around how to price these options and get liquidity, which was definitely like a big challenge. But we ran into we built this and it worked relatively well. The only reason was it was quite hard to get liquidity, especially around the time that FTX collapsed. A lot of market makers pulling out from DeFi and Solana was going through a bit of a rough patch. And given the fragmentation of liquidity and options across all the strikes and expiries and the kind of lack of professional market makers who knew how to price these things, we ended up sunsetting that product and pivoting fully to perps trading. For people who are not familiar, perps are perpetual futures. If you're familiar with futures trading, you can basically trade different markets on leverage. And it's very nice in the perps context that you don't have expiries. You can just trade with, I guess, not having to roll these different expiries. And it's just like a really nice crypto native product. You see it traded on majority of centralized exchanges and a lot of decentralized exchanges. Gives you access to leverage. You can long and short stuff. We just think it's like a great product to do building.
Yeah, for sure. And on that topic of perps trading, how does kind of liquidations play into this? And what is your model for it, maybe opposed to other ones out there?
Sounds good. Yeah, we don't do anything crazy there. Like we go with what is pretty standard in terms of liquidation. So at the moment with our current platform, we offer up to 20x leverage, which we think is like relatively conservative as things go. We see some more kind of crazy stuff happening.
How high do they go? Yeah.
We see it, like, I remember Binance and FTX back in the day, before the whole meltdown, was offering 125x leverage. With our new infrastructure, which we can get to later, we're hoping to offer 100x. That's what some other platforms on Solana are offering. And given that we'll have much faster infrastructure and able to kind of like pick up and de-risk these positions before they go underwater, we're pretty confident that we can kind of adapt that into our margin engine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely DYOR to our listeners. I personally don't do leverage trading, but I know a fair amount of people that do. I guess, what else do you kind of see as like the best user base for Zeta? Is it like whales? Is it institutional people, maybe long-term? Retail? How do you kind of look at that?
Yeah, we've definitely been getting our heads around that and trying to figure out what is the ideal audience. I think when we started, it was a very institutional crowd given options. I think we're a very sophisticated product. We couldn't just go out to your average user and not only explain how to onboard onto crypto, but also how to trade these options with gamma, theta, and delta, and all these different kind of Greek constants. But then, yeah, with perps, we found it much easier to get product market fit with what I would consider the DeFi audience, which is a little bit more left curve, I guess, for most intensive purposes. And then now I think we're kind of like honing in on this like pro trader, pro user segment, people who are actually kind of fairly sophisticated, maybe not institutions, but people who trade, intraday, who are kind of terminally online, who love to trade different markets and try and jump on these trends. I think that's the edge that derivatives have. Spot is kind of great. You can kind of buy this big bag of Bitcoin and sit on it for a year. But I think if you want to do intraday trading, you want to do momentum trading and stuff like that, perps are amazing because you have leverage, the ability to short, like I mentioned before.
Mm-hmm. I know you've talked about this in the past, so I kind of wanted to ask you about it on the show, but why do you think it's taken a long time for certain financial categories like perps and derivatives to come on chain?
That's a really good question. I would say a lot of it comes down to infrastructure and the kind of performance that we're seeing on new blockchains. So that was a big motivation of why we built on Solana in the first place. Mm-hmm. We were looking at what existed there in Ethereum in early 2021. And some of these options platforms and arguably other perp platforms had massive spreads, the gas fees, and generally the fees you had to pay just like kind of just didn't make a lot of sense to trade on. Like you would just be losing money and it'd be eating into your P&L and you'd be crossing massive spreads. But we saw with Solana, there was already a big improvement to do the on-chain central limit order books that we did. We could actually have much tighter markets than we'd seen on the Ethereum side. And now we're going a kind of step further. We're seeing a lot of platforms start moving down the app chain route. So some of the leading perps platforms have kind of built their own layer ones or layer twos like we're building. And we're getting drastically improved performance there. And so with our new platform, at least, we get something that is basically the performance of a centralized exchange, and people don't have to compromise. You have the best of both worlds. You have verifiability and transparency of doing things on a blockchain, but then you also have high performance, thousands of trades a second, 5 millisecond latency to place orders, which starts feeling a bit more like traditional finance, or at least centralized crypto finance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's like faster than I could place an order. It's already done, right? 5 milliseconds.
Mostly for the programmatic guys. Those market makers have to be replacing their quotes and trying not to get, picked off and sniped. So they care a lot about these latency games.
100%. On the topic of Zeta's L2, how does that kind of play into, Solana is inherently very, very fast and people talk about it all the time. And to your point, it is a really great place for DeFi to flourish. But why does it need an L2 on top of it? Or what is kind of your thesis behind that?
Yeah, great question. This has been asked a lot at
I'm sure it
panels
has.
that I've been on. I feel like it's a controversial thing because everyone loves to come in thinking Solana is this like monolithic chain. It's all about performance. Why do we need these new things? And I would say there's room for both. I would go out there and say not every application has to be on an app chain or an L2. There are plenty that need very high levels of composability and want to lower the friction. However, I think in specialized cases, for example, if you're trying to build something that is like a NASDAQ on-chain experience, it needs to be extremely fast, extremely low congestion, high throughput. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe if you want to do gaming or deep in apps that have very like niche properties that need kind of custom infrastructure, that makes a lot of sense. And so that's what drove us to build the current platform that we're building out. We needed really good reliability. Imagine if you're an exchange and you have millions of dollars, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of risk. there, and suddenly the chain gets congested, it goes down, you're not able to liquidate positions. This is kind of something that we went through. There was like big episodes of Solana congestion, and we just had like a lot of risk on, and I was kind of like kept me up at night, and I was like, I want higher reliability and the ability to get transactions through when things crunch. And there's this weird kind of a feedback loop where it's like, the more the price moves, the more liquidations and other things happen, which means that more people are spamming orders to get it on chain. It kind of creates this bad feedback cycle. So that was one thing that we were trying to solve. The other one was like provisioning liquidity on DeFi, as we talked about, is quite difficult and quite painful at the moment. Like market makers have to onboard, they have to upskill with this totally new tech stack. You can't even sometimes like cancel orders when things are congested. Some of the tooling is just very painful. So we're solving a lot of that because we're able to just like customize it now and make it very fast. Like I said, you know that your orders are going to go through and not going to have any kind of problems. And some of like the tooling that we have there is going to be really nice. And then on the user facing side of things, we can actually have a lot more control. We can make it gasless. You know, people don't have to come in there and fund it and muck around with that. And we can make the onboarding experience very seamless. And that's kind of thinking ahead a couple of years. I want to build something that feels like a Robinhood. People just get a link or download an app, and they're able to log in. They're able to, you know, connect their bank account or credit card, onboard funds onto there, and they're good to go. They don't need to worry about passphrases. They don't need to worry about gas tokens and things like that. And so we're kind of like 50% of the way there. People can log in right now with like Google or their TikTok account or, you know, X account. They can get in there, and we should have a decentralized on-ramp so they can go straight in there and they can, you know, start trading within hopefully seconds or within a minute, which I think will be really cool.
Why do you think that hasn't been built already today, especially in the Solana market or on Solana?
That's a really good question. I guess things take time. Like we're only seeing now over the last 2 or 3 years, like some of the base primitives come out in terms of like spot aggregators, lending. And we do on the Solana side have a very good focus on product and end users. I think just a lot of the tools necessary to make it work have still been in primitive phases, like the wallet partners that we're working with, finally coming out with nice embedded wallet infrastructure, social recovery in case people lose their stuff. All these kind of things are still very much being developed. On the topic of on-ramps, we've been wanting to integrate on-ramps for a long time, but the fees are just extremely high. And that kind of disconnect, I guess, between the crypto world and the real world and the kind of banking rails there, I think is still, there's like a lot of middlemen and a lot of kind of issues there, but it seems to be getting better all the time. Stable coins as well, like, you know, getting people to use that and making that cheaper. You know, I saw Stripe just did like $1 billion acquisition of a big stablecoin company recently. So yeah, I think things are starting to come together pretty quickly. In the next year or two, I think the UX for crypto should look remarkably better.
Yeah, I hope so. I definitely hope so. On the topic of Zeta's L2, is it solely for Zeta to use, or would you encourage other apps and developers to build on top of it as well?
Yeah, really good question. At the moment, we're trying to take a very focused approach because we think that's what works. We've seen a lot of people come to market with, hey, we're a generalized L2. We're trying to do everything under the sun, from prediction markets to NFTs to gaming and whatever. I think that's personally for us as a kind of fairly lean team a waste of time. And we have that background in trading, and that's what we want to build out. And that's the use case is like ultra low latency stuff where finance makes a lot of sense. So we want Zeta and that kind of perps primitive and that lending primitive that we're going to build to be first class citizens there. And then I think off the back of that, maybe 6 months from now, we start opening up to builders. We want people building, you know, maybe like the Athena on our chain, where it's like a stable coin backed by the funding rate on our perps. Or if anyone else has like strategy vaults that they want to run on top of that, tap into the liquidity that exists there. And then progressively, I think, open that up to more primitives that can use and tap into the existing liquidity that we have.
When can we expect it to come live? Is there any status update there? Sure, you get asked this all the time.
Super hard. Yeah. Like I just clocked off of like a 12-hour day of just grinding code. So
there we go. So it's live. Yeah.
almost very, very close. We're about like 2 or 3 weeks off a test net. I think we're just going to roll it out to like, you know, power user group of people that we're like really close with that trade a lot, and they can give us a lot of feedback and expect that the product is going to be janky. So I'm hoping like end of November, we can start rolling it out more publicly. We want to get people on board, just testing it with the expectation that it's not going to be perfect, a bit rough around the edges, but I think it will blow people's minds in terms of the speeds that you're now able to get on Solana. And then in terms of a mainnet release, we're targeting, I think, like Q1 next year. So working aggressively towards that goal, but hopefully getting it out before the bull market and before everything rips so people can go in there and they can trade.
We're getting a bull market? Is that what you just said, Tristan?
I'm not going to promise it. I mean, I'm gearing up and putting a lot of my chips on that, but
Q1,
we'll have to see how it goes.
Bull market. Okay.
Things are promising. Yep.
Yeah, I guess on the state of the current market, I'm curious. You've been on the road traveling to a bunch of conferences, as we've discussed off camera. What is kind of the conversations you're having with people both in the market, but then founders, builders that are really focused on the trading landscape? How are you guys all looking at this?
That's a good question. I mean, like we talked about, we just went through Token 2049, which was probably the biggest conference of the year out in my backyard in Singapore, which is great, just down the road. And it was insane. Like, honestly, I barely even went to the main conference, but just walking in there, it's like tens of thousands of people bought tickets, which is just mind blowing compared to the, I guess, relative bear market that we've gone through. There were like booths everywhere. These booths aren't cheap either. Like, people have to pay thousands of dollars essentially to do that. So someone is paying for all these booths. Like, I'm pretty sure the revenue of the conference organizers, pretty significant. So I'm like, okay, money is definitely pouring into the system, and it feels like things are starting to heat up. Like, at least for us on the Solana side, like, it's a completely like different paradigm to what it was a year ago, when everyone was like, why are you building on this chain? Like, you know, DeFi doesn't make sense, or yada, yada. And then now you talk to all these people and they're like, oh yeah, it's like a no-brainer that you guys did this. And, that's been very different. I also came back from the US, was just a permissionless, just to see what was up there. So it was pretty interesting. I think there's still like a very high quality of like builders and engineers and researchers in the US, but I can definitely tell things have dampened down a bit to what I imagined they were previously. There's like less of a turnout. I think people are like less willing to engage with US conferences and seeing a lot of momentum shift outside of the US and to places like Asia. So that's been like an interesting dynamic, given that we've kind of placed some bets here, and that's something that we're going to see accelerate. I think people are cautiously optimistic. I think a lot is riding on the election and what happens there. I think that's going to shake up a lot of things, and people are expecting, I guess it's like the calm before the storm now. Something crazy is probably going to happen like soon after election time and after all these rate cuts. So I think those are kind of some of the catalysts that people are eyeing.
Maybe with all the macroeconomic elements included, I'm curious, what would you say crypto traders want more of now? Because based off that, I would imagine maybe de-risking for a little bit, but maybe you know better.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think people are looking to get into the projects with solid fundamentals now, because there's the expectation that those will really like rip in the bull market. That being said, things have been pretty choppy and going sideways for the last couple of months. I think you saw some signs of life, or at least on the Solana side, it went ballistic 6 months ago, and then it kind of petered out and has maintained pretty range bound. I think it's still showing signs of strength. It hasn't obviously just like fallen off a cliff, and it's kind of crazy. Everyone's bearish on Twitter, but yet Bitcoin's back at 70K and like things are looking pretty good. I think. But something I've noticed is definitely people are hunting for that volatility, even though some of the alts and some of the majors are kind of chopping sideways. Meme coins, obviously, love them or hate them, have been taking off, and some of these platforms have been doing insane amounts of revenue, which just shows that people really love this stuff and want to be trading it. The vast majority of volume seems to be going through assets like that, and it's pretty crazy to witness that market dynamic.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about Zeta's business model. Aside from trading fees, is there other ways that you kind of want to maintain it and make it an attractive option for both, your existing users and then future ones to come in? Would it be like a token or some other model?
Yeah, so we I guess primarily focus on trading fees. It's like the bread and butter of most exchanges. We actually did launch a token recently as well. And now kind of plans to decentralize the protocol and have it more kind of bought in from community, and at least like let those people kind of take part in some of the governance of the platform. We've also been working on some kind of rewards models. So the more that people trade, they can actually, earn some kind of stake in the exchange through the token. And we're also trying to come up with like more functionality. For example, discounts for trading fees and stuff like that. If you hold and stake tokens, we're kind of looking through different models to kind of make it more efficient and more worthwhile to trade on the platform as well. So yeah, I think that's like a nice model, is even though it's not equity, I guess, per se, but like people, I guess, have a little bit of stake in the business, and they can kind of like own and be on the ground floor with some of these companies. Whereas I imagine not what happens with like a NASDAQ or some of these, large exchanges. People very much just like come there as a customer. But I think it's nice for people to be involved on the ground floor.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned governance too. So would they be able to vote and kind of decide what happens with Zeta, or?
Yeah, that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
So we're kind of looking to launch the DAO relatively soon, and kind of putting work towards that. Starting off with very simple decisions like what would be some of our new listings coming up. That's been like a fairly hot topic, and things that people love to chip into. But I think longer term, in terms of some of the decisions and how we kind of shape the roadmap of Zeta, I think getting the community and some of our kind of biggest users to weigh in on that and be able to like vote on that, shape the roadmap, is I think a great way to do it in like a community fashion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I also wanted to ask you about what it's been like over the past 3 years building in Solana, especially during the last bear market, FTX collapse, Solana at $8, all these different things. How do you kind of hold conviction when everyone else is kind of pointing at you and maybe laughing, and now they're pointing at you and saying, oh my God, like he's so lucky, whatever, things like that. Like, obviously it's a big roller coaster, but as a founder, someone building in this space, I'm sure others would probably love to hear your advice and kind of journey through that.
Yeah, this has probably been one of the biggest learnings. Like, sure, you can write the code and you can kind of do all this kind of stuff, but I think that's like not really the most important skill. I think the most important skill is perseverance and how you build through those down moments. I think it's something that either Sam Altman or one of those guys say is like the number one quality that you see of successful founders is perseverance. And, when you're getting kicked, just being able to like get back up and continue building. And definitely the low points are pretty low. I think Anatoly has said this before as well, like very much feels like a roller coaster ride. Some days you feel like an absolute genius and like you're changing the world. Some days you feel like a complete idiot. And I think that's all part of the imposter syndrome, and no one seems to really get over that, no matter how big they get. But for us during the bear market, I guess I wouldn't say it was clear to me, but it was evident that the fundamentals of platforms like Solana hadn't changed. It was still a high performance network that had low fees, and that had like a lot of really good technical stuff going for it. And not only that, the ecosystem was incredibly strong. So I really liked seeing that. And that kind of kept me going through the dark days, was hanging out with a lot of the other founders and chatting. And even though they were a bit down, I think they were still, shipping products, still trying to like keep their heads up and do things. And I was like, wow, these guys are actually like really talented people who are deciding to stick around and not just jumping onto the next thing. And like, we did lose a lot of people who just went to like, oh, what's the hot new EVM fork chain? And let's go build on there. But I saw the most talented people stuck around because they realized, like we did when we surveyed a lot of these other ecosystems, that other chains wouldn't meet our need. They wouldn't scale to the need that Solana already kind of offered us. So yeah, that was just like an interesting realization. We just put our heads down with the thought that fundamentals haven't changed, and the market's got to correct and wake up to this fact. Although I was pretty humble in feeling that, yeah, the market can, I think, stay irrational, and I obviously don't want to put my company at risk, go out of business by going down with this chain. It might have the best tech in the world, but if users don't care and there's not a compelling narrative there or some value proposition for people to come in, then it's kind of like a dead loss. But I guess we were right. Like Breakpoint happened last year, and then the price pumped like crazy, which is like the best marketing for better or for worse. Yeah. And then people started pouring into the chain. Like it was crazy for us because we'd been building this product for so long, and we'd refactored it and done a bunch of improvements in the bear market. Like thank God we did as well, because I think our platform would have struggled with the influx of users that we had. And then suddenly overnight, like Jito airdrop happens. Everyone is like flush with cash essentially. On the Solana chain, they got this like massive airdrop, and people are putting it back into DeFi. And suddenly we see our users go from like a couple of thousand to like 100,000 within a month or two, which was just insane. It broke all our infrastructure. We had to change a lot of stuff and improve things, but it was a really good problem to have. And then I was like, we didn't change that much between those 2 points. I guess it's just like the market moves and you really have to be there to capture it and be ready for it. Things can't be taking off and then you're like, okay, I'll take 6 months to build my product. Like you got to be there and you got to be ready and you got to be not writing code. You got to be out there on Twitter doing the marketing and doing the growth stuff is what we learned.
Yeah, 100%. So it was 100,000. How many users do you guys have today?
It's still around like the 5 to 10,000 range. So it's like definitely like petered off, I think, a little bit since the highs, but that's obviously like airdrop hype. Solana was at like max frothiness, but now it's at like a good level where I think we can work with the smaller user base that we have now, who are pretty dedicated, who've been using the product for a long time, and it's really good workshopping, I think, in these kind of small groups and being able to talk through the feedback. You don't have the massive noise of people asking for like, when's the token coming, or when's this new thing going to get listed, and it's nice to just be back in building mode.
Yeah, they're real users too. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's right.
On the topic of Solana, in what I asked you before, you were talking like with founders, especially during the bear market, where you were like, there were just no other chains that made sense to you guys. Today, there's a bunch of L1s popping up. Maybe they're in testnet, about to launch mainnet. You can imagine some of the ones when I say that. Do you see other L1s as competitors or, up to the same speed, both figuratively and literally, as Solana? Or do you still see it as like the number one, only and best option?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think Solana, because it's got a few years on all these new chains, is really going to stick around and do great things this cycle. I think it's kind of, people have been saying it's where Ethereum was at in like 2017 or 2018. And so it's kind of gone through that trial by fire, where essentially the network back in the day used to go down every other week and had all kinds of issues. And I guess the core engineering team really had their hands full trying to fix and battle test and harden against a lot of these failure modes. So that's something you can't just like speed run. I think that takes time, some of the like security and scaling stuff. I think that aside, that's all engineering stuff. I think just like getting the mind share, getting the users, getting like USDC and Circle to support your things, having all the bridges in there, having a bunch of these like, traditional finance institutions now like eyeing it, having like custody infrastructure up there. That takes like a very, very long time. It took us years to get it. Like I talked to a lot of wallet providers and custodians years ago, and they were just like, yeah, this is not even on our roadmap. Didn't even bother. And now like they're all integrated. So
there we go.
I'm definitely excited for the new chains. I think they'll do pretty well, and they're kind of learning from a lot of the mistakes that Solana made in terms of the design decisions. To Anatoly's credit, I think the design he had a couple of years ago has largely stayed unchanged, and it's worked very well. But there are, new consensus mechanisms, new ways of processing transactions, new database technology that people have come out with, which are definitely like herald some improvements. I mean, everyone's talking about like Sui has done really well recently. And I think they have like a very interesting like transaction ordering model. Like Monet is trying to go and parallelize the EVM and do stuff on that side. So I think they're all tackling it in their own interesting ways. But I definitely think they'll do well for sure. But they're like pre-mainnet or, only came to mainnet recently. So I think it's going to take a couple of years to get steam. And I think Solana's got the head start on a lot of those guys for now.
Right. They're in their early days, and Solana is, driving down the street. Off it goes. In terms of the DeFi sector, especially on Solana, where do you kind of see it going in the near term, let's say next year, and then long term, 3 to 5 years? That's long term to me.
So I think where we're at right now is we see a lot of the core primitives have been built out, which is nice. So in the early days, 2021, when we started, it was a lot of, to be honest, like copy pasting from Ethereum. It's like, who's going to build the Uni v3 from, Ethereum and build that on there? Who's going to build the Aave of Solana, et cetera, et cetera. So we're past that stage. We already have a bunch of pretty established, protocols there with a bunch of TVL. I think TVL on Solana is now like north of 6 billion, which is pretty impressive. And that's actually, I think, similar, if not higher than the peaks of like FTX mania in 2021. So that's really good to see. So right now, yeah, like seeing less people just building out like the core stuff because it already exists and then building things on top of that, which is really nice because those interfaces are getting more robust. We're obviously seeing like this big spot wave for like meme coins, especially a lot of that spot trading through AMMs and Jupiter really eating up a lot of market share there, doing super well. It's just becoming this kind of like front page for Solana, trade any token. I think it's like fantastic what they've done. And meme coins obviously popping off with like pump.fun, which is
right.
I think a little bit of a negative EV game to play, but it's really attracted a lot of users to the chain and people potentially that are not crypto native who want to get in there and kind of speculate on some of these things. Where I see it evolving in the next year or two, and like the big bet that we're placing is we think that that is going to rotate back into some of the majors. I think once some of the majors start ripping again, say Solana passes $200, there's going to be a lot of capital rotation, I think, back into those altcoin assets, which now have seen like, I guess, like signs of weakness. But those things are going to start spending. People are going to start trading that. Where are they going to want to go? Price discovery tends to happen through derivatives markets. So that's why we expect people are going to flock to perps. And that's why we're trying to get something to market that is going to service that need. I would say the current derivatives landscape on Solana is yet to catch up with what's been happening on the spot side. We still have some platforms. They're still doing AMM based stuff. They're a little bit clunky or rough around the edges. Like things I think need to improve a lot to be competitive with what's happening on like the Ethereum and Cosmos side, as well as the centralized exchange side. But I think that's going to flip very quickly. Another thing that we're also seeing, which is a great trend, is like DeFi to CeFi volume ratio is actually trending pretty strongly in the direction for us DeFi guys. I think it's now about 14 or 15% last I looked on the block, and you can kind of see it just like increasing in market share every month as I think market share is starting to graduate from CeFi to DeFi, which is really cool. And you're seeing some large platforms, both, Jupiter on the spot side, as well as some of the decentralized derivatives exchanges like Hyperliquid doing really well. And at some points, like 10% of Binance open interest. So I think these are all like great catalysts and great signs to see that more is going to shift to DeFi, more is going to shift to derivatives, I think, in the next year.
Mm-hmm. What would you attribute to that growth from CeFi to DeFi?
I would just say the apps are getting better, obviously, and people are starting to treat it more as their primary exchange, which is really nice. Like, I think that was not really a consideration for like 3 or 4 years ago. Essentially, people just treat it as an experiment and it's a bit of fun. But now these things are getting pretty damn good. And it's nice in that they're kind of actually faster to market than some of the centralized guys. This is why Uniswap, I think, was really popular in the early days, was because you could just list any market on there, right? You go there, you list a new token, you put it in this like permissionless pool, people start trading it. You don't have to wait to get a listing. And this is exactly what's happening all over again on Solana with Radium and Pump.fun. Someone wants to launch the next, meme coin, the next, Trump or Joe Biden thing, essentially. And then they can just put it straight on there. They don't have to go and get a listing from Binance to get liquidity and see the thing go up there. And Pump.fun has actually like lowered that barrier where you don't have to pay whatever the fee it is to Radium to list a pool. It's like you can kind of bootstrap this thing with just a couple of dollars, and once it gets traction, it's kind of going on there. So you're seeing all these new launches, and that's something we want to lean into as well. Like, people seem to care about this long tail of assets and new markets and hot new things. So I think that's been pretty cool to see. And that's like an edge that I think is just not going to happen in CeFi because it's like too slow moving. There's too many kind of like barriers there. Like here, it's a bit more like the Wild West. People can do everything. That's where the alpha is. Right. And then there's like benefits on that, right? It's like sometimes there's like airdrops or other rewards that people get by trading on chain. I think that's something that's really cool. If you're just trading on, your average exchange or maybe in like Robinhood or something or other, like it's purely a trading experience. There's no kind of added bells and whistles there. And I think some of the yields on DeFi are starting to get higher as well, which is pretty cool. So for the people that don't want to be sitting in RWAs and treasury bills, I think they can kind of go down the more riskier end of the spectrum and be on DeFi.
100%. DeFi aside, what other categories do you see a lot of promise for in the Solana ecosystem?
Good question. So I think one that is very unique that I like seeing is, like I mentioned, DeepIn on Solana. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there just because the scalability guarantees that you're able to get on Solana. So you have people building like decentralized like Wi-Fi networks essentially, or ways to do kind of like mobile broadband, which I think is like pretty cool if you can decentralize some of these things and actually run over this network, incentivize people to run nodes and other kind of hardware stuff. I think that's like a really interesting thing for me, like that intersection with like the hardware, the software stuff, and then the incentive layer on top of it, which is like coordinating everyone. One that obviously gets hyped up a lot, and like given my background is like in AI. I think it's pretty cool. I think a lot of it is like still very like questionable at the moment, what the actual kind of value prop is there. But you know, I was just in San Francisco and hanging out with a lot of people who work in that field, and then they're like, yeah, like costs for GPUs and doing inference and stuff like that is getting pretty expensive. It's getting monopolized by, you know, a few different actors. A lot of like chip production, obviously, going through, you know, super central things of like TSMC and NVIDIA. And all the cloud companies are kind of hogging a lot of the GPU market share there and kind of having to ration it out. And so a good idea one of my friends came up with was how do we do inference in a decentralized way? Everyone can kind of, you can use your like home laptop or something or other and end up kind of producing the text output for, you know, these kind of chat GPT type models. And there's ways to like incentivize people to share their compute resources and their bandwidth and run some of these models. And I think that's kind of like a nice evolution that should hopefully bring prices down and bring down some of the monopolies there. Mm-hmm. And yeah, people are literally building this kind of stuff on Solana. And I think it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see all of it kind of transpire and evolve on that front. Tristan, last major thing. Can you leave us with a piece of advice? I know you talked through your journey before, but for our listeners out there, what's something that maybe you've carried with you throughout your time in this industry?
Yeah, I think just having conviction on things and being able to like focus in on the opportunity and believing in yourself is really difficult, especially in crypto where there's this shiny object syndrome. It's impossible to keep up with the million things that are happening out there. But I think it's really surprising to me, almost having got into the industry just a couple of years ago, going from someone who was, I guess, like somewhat of an outsider to being on podcasts like this, going on a bunch of these like major conferences and talking about crypto and actually building a product that I think is very much on the cutting edge. I think that's the exciting part of crypto is even a Vitalik or something like that. You know, he's probably only been here for a little over a decade building in crypto. You know, it's just like a very fresh industry. There's a lot of greenfield stuff and opportunities to kind of pick up. But there's also a lot of noise, especially going into a bull market with things popping up. So I think it's an exciting time to be getting back in there. A lot of people have been pivoting to AI and other industries, but I think crypto is kind of like oversold right now in a sense. And I think it's kind of going to start to come back. So I think it's really exciting seeing with some of these recent hackathons, which is how we got started on Solana. They're picking up traction again. Heaps of people are pouring in. So I love to see new products and people building things. So I always encourage people. I'm on Twitter. So if anyone has a new product or something that they want to get feedback on or just kind of like talk about things like that, I'm always kind of open, DMs open and happy to chat about stuff. But yeah, I just love seeing people build new things and kind of push the meta forwards.
Amazing. Tristan, what's your Twitter so people can hit you up?
My Twitter is Tristan0x.
There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show today. It was an absolute pleasure, and I'm excited to see what happens with Zeta.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.